in Museum. On Critical Hour Report, we bring back Dr. Frank George, the esteemed psychologist and cognitive neuroscientist whose groundbreaking work has been referenced more than 4,000 times across scientific and medical journals. Recognized among the top 1% of Google scholars globally, he has dedicated the last decade to a meticulous examination of Donald Trump's psychological profile. There is no denying that Trump represents a profoundly intricate subject, one that blends the obvious with the deeply layered in ways that demand sustained attention to truly grasp. Dr. George notes that while certain elements of Trump's makeup seem relatively straightforward at first glance, unraveling the full picture requires years of careful observation because the complexities run far deeper than surface appearances suggest. Many longtime watchers of the presidency have highlighted a clear pattern of deterioration in his capabilities, one that has grown increasingly apparent to the public eye. Despite this, he continues to navigate public engagements, from delivering addresses to participating in formal state visits like the one with the king, even as those moments often come off as awkward, unpredictable, and at times outright humiliating. The question lingers: how does one account for this ongoing ability to hold things together on a basic level, while the underlying erosion becomes harder to ignore? When pressed for greater detail on the nature of this decline, especially in the past year or so, Dr. George draws attention to specific episodes that reveal much more than mere etiquette lapses. Consider the high-profile encounter with royalty, where Trump inserted himself ahead of protocol to seize the handshake. Far from innocent clumsiness or poor upbringing, experts in the field interpret this as a deliberate assertion of superiority, a hallmark of the grandiosity that defines malignant narcissism. This compulsion to position himself as dominant in any setting has escalated noticeably, manifesting more often and with less restraint than it did even 5 or 10 years earlier. Similar patterns emerged previously, such as when he physically maneuvered past others on stage during major international gatherings like the G20, shoving his way forward to claim center position as if declaring, in effect, that he must always lead and outshine everyone around him. This behavior ties directly into broader patterns, including instances where he dismissed entire teams of medical experts during public briefings, insisting he alone possessed superior insight and even floating extreme ideas like using household disinfectants in unconventional ways. Such moments underscore a relentless drive to be perceived as the ultimate authority on every topic, to acknowledge the value of collective expertise. To clarify the distinction here, Dr. George emphasizes that malignant narcissism stands apart from more episodic conditions like dementia, bipolar disorder, or depression. Those latter issues often emerge at particular life stages and in many cases allow for some form of intervention or management, even as dementia itself advances over time. In stark contrast, malignant narcissism is embedded at the very foundation of a person's character, shaped by genetic factors, early neurodevelopmental influences, and formative experiences through childhood and beyond. It intensifies based on external surroundings, and in Trump's situation, the environment served as an ideal incubator, amplifying these traits to extraordinary levels rather than tempering them. Unlike treatable disorders, this is not something that yields to therapy or fades away. It constitutes an unchangeable core element of identity. A particularly insightful perspective Dr. George offers involves the intricate interplay of cause and effect in Trump's trajectory. Many observers assume the cognitive slippage directly triggers impulsive or erratic choices, such as those involving foreign policy flashpoints like Iran or public confrontations. Yet the reality, he suggests, forms a self-reinforcing cycle or loop. The personality disorder fuels chaotic decision-making aimed primarily at self-preservation, what some might mistakenly label as strategic brilliance, leading to unpredictable shifts, from threats of blockades to regime change rhetoric or nuclear posturing. When these approaches halt and falter and produce backlash, they in turn accelerate the personal decline, deepening the chaos and feeding back into further instability. This vicious spiral affects both the individual's mental state and the wider geopolitical landscape, compounding problems rather than resolving them. The Iran scenario, for example, may have originated partly as a calculated diversion from persistent scandals, like the Epstein documents dominating headlines, a tactic Trump has contemplated for years dating back to his initial term in office. However, the disappointing results only layered additional strain onto existing vulnerabilities, transforming the intended distraction into yet another layer of damage that piles up without relief. Building on prior discussions, Dr. George reaffirms his assessment that the president is contending with frontotemporal dementia rather than Alzheimer's disease. At a broader level, he explains that malignant narcissism and frontotemporal dementia operate independently of each other, with no inherent link making one more likely to accompany the other. Both conditions occur infrequently in the general population, so their simultaneous presence in any individual qualifies as exceptionally uncommon, a statistical rarity akin to an extraordinarily unlucky draw. When that convergence happens in the context of a global leader wielding immense authority, the odds become vanishingly small, potentially unprecedented in historical terms. The dialogue shifts to a vivid illustration of this grandiosity in action from just weeks ago. Trump shared an image portraying him in a messianic role, healing the afflicted, only to later describe it publicly as a depiction of himself in the guise of a physician treating a patient. Drawing on everyday knowledge of medical attire, from scrubs and lab coats to personalized vests, Dr. George firmly rejects the notion that this was a deliberate deflection to avoid social awkwardness. Instead, he views it as authentic alignment with a messianic self-image, part of a pattern that includes earlier visuals casting Trump as the Pope. Recent critical comments from religious leaders, interpreted through the lens of the disorder as personal attacks, only reinforce the need to dominate even sacred or symbolic realms, elevating himself to the status of a new savior figure. The fact that such content, often AI-generated by fervent supporters, would be embraced and amplified by the president himself speaks volumes about the depth of this narcissistic drive. Viewers have frequently pointed out a discrepancy in earlier forecasts. For years, experts and commentators predicted a swift collapse where Trump would soon struggle to maintain even basic functionality. Yet he persists in managing appearances and scripted events with enough coherence to get by superficially. Dr. George attributes some of these overly precise timelines to elements of sensationalism or audience engagement tactics, acknowledging that the pace of dementia-related progression is inherently variable and unpredictable. Factors like access to unparalleled medical resources mean he is far from passively deteriorating in isolation, which can mask or slow the outward signs temporarily. Nevertheless, the direction remains one of steady, irreversible advancement with no possibility of reversal, even if exact milestones prove elusive. Turning to concrete manifestations, Dr. George identifies pronounced disinhibition and eroded impulse control as key indicators amplified by the dementia. Behaviors such as issuing sweeping threats to eradicate an entire civilization or casually insulting a journalist with a dismissive nickname like Quiet Piggy exemplify this loss of restraint. While malignant narcissism alone might produce similar outbursts occasionally, the neurological changes from frontotemporal dementia intensify their frequency, severity, and unpredictability. Unlike Alzheimer's, which tends to gradually diminish a person's presence, frontotemporal dementia often heightens underlying traits, magnifying the serious baseline tendencies already present. Beyond these, additional hallmarks include persistent fixation on certain narratives that refuse to fade, such as repeated claims about election integrity, or long-standing grievances involving past figures like Obama. There are also instances of confabulation, where fabricated or impossible accounts are presented as fact, for instance, referencing military aviation in historical events where it simply could not have existed, like the War of 1812. Word selection errors and prolonged digressions further populate speeches, creating a tapestry of symptoms that attentive listeners can trace line by line. An important observation arises regarding scripted versus spontaneous delivery. Prepared remarks, often crafted by others, allow Trump to maintain a semblance of structure and even handle readings like biblical passages, though not without occasional stumbles. Yet the most revealing insights emerge during unscripted deviations or personal communications on platforms like Truth Social, where raw impulses surface unfiltered and the cumulative effects of decline become unmistakable. These off-the-cuff moments serve as clearer windows into the current reality than polished, staff-reviewed content ever could. As for what lies ahead in the near term, perhaps the next 6 months, Dr. George stops short of crystal ball predictions, emphasizing he is no oracle capable of forecasting specific actions. What he can project with confidence is a progressive constriction of viable pathways forward, coupled with heightened escalation, whether through intensified rhetoric, maneuvers, or other expressions, as the narrowing options and advancing conditions push the dynamic toward more extreme manifestations. The subjects available for such intensification may themselves diminish over time, but the overall pattern points toward amplification rather than moderation. As Critical Hour Report continues to unpack these pressing developments in our political sphere, it prompts a sobering reflection on the rare and precarious fusion of deep-seated personality traits with advancing neurological challenges at the highest levels of power. In an era where leadership demands clarity and stability, what lasting consequences might this extraordinary convergence hold for governance, public trust, and the nation's trajectory moving forward? The patterns invite us all to consider the human vulnerabilities that no office can fully shield, urging deeper vigilance and thoughtful discourse about the qualities we expect from those entrusted with such profound responsibility.